Hello, everybody, and welcome to StarNet Link. And today on my channel, we have a guest, and this is Teresa. And why don't you go ahead, Teresa, introduce yourself and tell a little bit about your story or the work that you do?
Okay. Well, my name is Teresa Tindal, and I've been an experiencer since childhood. I come from a family line of experiencers, and I think probably going back much further than just the people I immediately know. I was a MUFON field investigator for 15 years, and I was the Maryland MUFON director for a few years. I've been researching the subject of UFOs, spirituality, and consciousness for 35 years. And I've looked at all aspects of this. Right now, I've been heavily looking at the religious and historical aspects. So that's really where my research is now. I was the first registered individual lobbyist on the UFO issue with Congress. And but I've turned away from that and I'm looking at history now.
That's really, really wonderful. So while you were working, for the people for my channel, can you tell us a little bit about what MUFON is or what the organization is about?
Sure. So MUFON is the largest civilian run and the oldest civilian run UFO research organization in the world. They're global and they have the world's largest civilian database of UFO encounters, kind of high strangeness events. It's all volunteer, it's not paid. And I believe that we're in every country but China.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Um, so so I know that you said that you were a lobbyist for Congress. Like, what are the type of UFO stuff that you tried to work with Congress about?
So, well, so I was trying. I worked a long time with Congress on trying to get them to acknowledge that there is an extraterrestrial presence, and there has been. I mean, it's not new. This is very, very ancient. So I worked a lot. Working with Congress on those issues. I mean, I even had individual members at dinner tell me about their UFO experiences. I had one Congresswoman actually burst into tears telling me her experience. So we're not the only people who have had experiences. They know it's just a very political issue. And I think that Tim Burchett said it best when he said that it's an issue that could unite us. It's an issue that would threaten the MIC, the military industrial complex, because it could unite us, and it could threaten the. He used the terminology the religious industrial complex, and I can see that being a threat to the narrative, and there's a lot of money there. And so those are some of the barriers that Congress is looking at right now in terms of the issue. I don't know that we're going to get the announcement from our president that everybody wants, that the extraterrestrials are here and they've always been here. I don't know that that's very realistic. And I also don't really know why people, it seems like people are looking for permission from their government to believe or not to believe and not to listen to their own internal experiences and the experiences of others. So I think that capital D disclosure might not be realistic. Like I said, there are a lot of political issues. There's a lot of money. Uh, and it's not even really what they do. They're not here to tell us about um, ancient, what has historically been ancient religious phenomenon. It's not their purview. I have an
So
angry little dog, if you don't mind. One
no, no,
second.
it's okay. I understand. Um, so when you are talking to different experiencers or with Congress, like what is the number one issue that you're dealing with to trying to like get people to talk about this um w- or the type of barriers to get people to like be interested in this or like start talking about it? Like, what are some of like the barriers or issues that you're starting to find out?
So initially, there was a huge issue of stigma, and I think that the 2017 article, um, Black Money or a project, I don't remember, the New York Times article, that there's been a lot to break down the stigma. That was the first step, because people were still seeing this as the realm of tinfoil hats. And so stigma was the first barrier. And I think we've gotten beyond that now. And I think people genuinely really want to know. But I sort of came to the realization that, knocking doors in Congress was not the route to get the information that I wanted, because, their interest is a military interest. And that's their only interest, and money and narrative. Crowd control, but that's not what I'm looking for. So I realized I was looking more for esoteric knowledge, and so that was why I switched my focus.
So, with all the type of work that you've been doing and the research that you're doing, what is the type of information that you have started to discover by going towards the esoteric knowledge type of group? Like, what have you started learning about, or what have you started to discover?
Yeah, well, that's really been the route. I mean, that has been a treasure trove, because there's a lot of question about, there's a lot of question right now about what has been, basically government narrative control, right? So if we can look free, DOD government. I mean, it's all right there. I think Bob Bigelow said it best when he said, it's right here in front of us. It's staring you in the face. My experience was with the gold disc, and so I've been able to trace that back all the way to literally carved into stone in ancient Mesopotamia. Currently, the Catholics have depicted the gold disc. Historically, the disc, or the winged disc, has represented the Holy Spirit. And we've had sun worship religions or cults. And I actually had the great opportunity to speak with a British theologian who did his PhD on sun disk worship. And, he didn't call me crazy, because my hypothesis is that these people knew the difference between the sun and something else. They just didn't have the terminology. So I've been able to trace the gold disc symbology. I mean, you can currently see it. It's the largest religious temple in the world. It's a Buddhist temple. It's larger than the Vatican. It's called Wat Phra Dhammakaya. In English, it's the Temple of 1 million Golden Buddhas. And just by the sheer size of it, it would seem to me they're expecting a really large crowd. And if you look at it, it is literally a temple in the shape of a gold UFO, flat and slightly raised in the center. And it's made out of 1 million golden Buddha statues. So that's present day. Catholicism has the peace dove, which actually is a very ancient symbol for the winged disc. And the winged disc was symbolic for the intermediary between God and the people. I mean, it goes, you can see it in ancient Persia. They even have a word for it. They call it the Faravahar. And the Zoroastrians of ancient Persia, now Iran, their god is Ahura Mazda. And literally, it is a bearded man inside of a winged gold disc with landing gear. I mean, it's over ancient Persepolis. I believe it's still even on the Iranian flag, or it was. It's over the tomb rather of Xerxes, and he was known as the God King. You can trace it back to ancient Egypt. They had the winged disc. They had the eye of God, the eye of Ra. You can trace it back to ancient Mesopotamia. And then literally it's carved into stone. We have a man in a flying winged disc carved into stone. It's some of our most ancient knowledge. And so I believe that they have been with us, and that they have they're very ancient, and I don't think they went away.
Yeah, yeah, I really do believe that they're still here. They're still watching over us. They're still studying us as a civilization and as a race. Do you believe that the experiences or your family experiences kind of influenced you or made you interested in pursuing this type of knowledge, or was it something else that inspired you to start researching or learning about this?
Yeah, so it was my own experiences. I actually started out, I was raised with two mothers and no religion. Um, and so I started out having experiences that I could not explain, but I knew were very real. And so what I really set out to do was to prove these experiences from I wanted to explain them from a scientific standpoint. And so I went into psychology. I started work on I completed all my coursework on my doctorate towards my my doctorate in clinical neuropsych, because I really wanted to understand the consciousness aspect. um, there's a lot that's involved with consciousness for this, and that's documented. That's in the Bible. It's extremely historic. It even says in Revelations, your sons and daughters will have prophetic dreams. And so this is an ancient phenomenon. Mary was told that she was going to give birth through a dream. So it's not just a new thing. This is a very ancient phenomenon, and I wanted to be able to explain what was happening in scientific terms. And I never thought that my research would lead me back to scriptures, and not just Christian scriptures, but all of the scriptures. I think all of the great holy books are describing their encounters with an advanced, a very advanced ancient presence, and they just didn't have the terminology, and I firmly believe that now.
So when you were studying this and they didn't really have the terminology, are you starting to uncover what they were actually trying to interpret or what they were trying to tell through different types of scripture around the world of what they were trying to see? Like, have you started to like decode it in a sense, or is there still a lot of unknown of what they were trying to describe back in the day?
Yeah, so I think we've seen different encounters with different beings. um there are even descriptions of wars taking place, sky wars and the sky chariots. And I think that one, we've seen documented continued encounters. And the other thing that I think we're seeing is, I think that we're seeing our the history of our creation. And I think that different interpretations of that have been different iterations of various religions, or they have been corrupted or interpreted for various purposes. Certainly, there have been a lot of political purposes, not even just now. This is, controlling the narrative of the gods has, historically been one of the most important things, right? So, but I think they're telling us our origins. And I think that if you go back to the ancient Sumerian, I think that you can see they're telling us, they talk about Enki and Enlil. And basically, what we have are two different competing groups of scientists, um, who were creating. And I think that now we are at a time in our own scientific evolution where we can understand the ethical dilemmas that they also would have been faced with. I think that we can understand, the concern well, you're creating a conscious, a new creation, a conscious creation. Will it be harmful? Will it hurt us? Will it revolt? These are all of the arguments that we're currently having with AI right now. And they had these same kinds of concerns when they were making creations. And, I think, the Bible says we were made in their image. And if you go back to the ancient Sumerian, um, I believe that they spliced their DNA with some kind of primate that was here. And I think that historically, I think there have been different generations um, of human creation, and we can see that, but I don't believe that humans just evolved from fish. I mean, the missing link has been one of the biggest issues in anthropology forever. And so I do think that we were intelligently created. And I think that there was probably a time when our behavior was, such an abomination. One group said to the other side, your creation's really out of hand here, and cut the project, cut it. And that's where our flood story comes from. And you can see that repeated in multiple ancient religious texts. But then, one side said, well, they're not all evil. And, we're going to save these guys, which, the line of Noah, and it's even older than that. So I do think that we have the terminology now to be able to understand creators making creation. And I think that we can see that reflected in our own religious history and creation stories around the world.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I have noticed that there are certain similarities of stories around the world that could all be interpreted in a way for each culture around the world to understand. So that's kind of interesting that you bring that up and share that knowledge here on my channel for other people that might be interested to explore that and learn from themselves from that. Um, you don't have to answer this question if you don't want to, but do you want to go in detail about some of the personal experiences or encounters that you have been through? Do you want to describe like what you have witnessed or what happened to you?
Sure. Yeah, I've talked about it before. And, even as a toddler, I have memories of kind of just weird things happening. But I would say the real moment that cemented it for me was when I was 10 years old. And the moms hadn't come home from work yet. And it was about sunset. So it would have been, rush hour. And I was in Tucson, Arizona. And I was just inside my house, as a latchkey kid. And I got a telepathic message. And even as a kid, I'm like, what the heck is this? This isn't me. This isn't my voice, but it wasn't in my ears. It was in my head. And, this was 1989. And yeah, do we have that technology now? But I don't think we had it then. So actually, I think it's back engineered from that, honestly. So this voice told me, and so this was like a conversation that went back and forth telepathically. And, it really took probably about a minute, but in reality, it would have been longer if we were speaking. But so there was a voice that told me to go outside and hit a bird with a rock. And, even as a 10-year-old, I'm like, that's just really bizarre. Why would I? First of all, I don't want to hurt animals. I would never hurt an animal. I love animals, and that's dumb. And what is this? Like these are all questions in my mind that apparently it's picking up on. And it repeats it to me, go outside and hit a bird with a rock. I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. And, so finally there was like some back and forth. And eventually it just said, okay, well, just go outside and lay down and look up. And I thought, okay, well, I can do that. I will do that, but I'm not going to hurt an animal. So I went outside. In Arizona, there are no lawns. It's just gravel. And so I laid in the gravel. I was making snow angels in the gravel, just looking up. And it wasn't a minute or two later that a gold disc came into my view. And immediately, as it started to come over the rooftops, it was going from west to east over Tucson. And immediately, as it began to go over the rooftops, um, even as a kid, I'm like, oh my gosh, I know what that is. That's a UFO. Because, all of my aunts and uncles and grandparents had had experiences too. Um, so I was kind of excited, like, wow, I'm seeing a UFO. And it didn't do any fancy, crazy things. It didn't have any fancy, crazy lights. No, no aliens waved at me. It just, it slowly just cruised right overhead, and I realized I'm seeing a UFO. So I ran next door to my girlfriend's house, and I don't know if it felt like it took forever or if it actually did take a long time, but it took a long time for her to come to the door, longer than usual. And I said, there's a UFO out here. Come look. And by the time she got out, she was able to see that there was definitely a craft in the distance. Of course, she couldn't make out its shape or its size or anything, but she could just see that it had continued to just kind of cruise east. And then there's a mountain range there. And then it began to subtly turn south as it approached the mountain range, and it was out of sight. And so after that, I seemed to develop an ESP ability. That's the terminology we would use now. And I remember my first experience wasn't long after the gold disc, and I had horses at a barn at the time, and I was always out riding my horses, whenever I could. It was my thing. And there was a man there who also had horses. Lots of people boarded there. And I had a random dream just about some guy at the barn. And I saw him get in a car accident. And I woke up and I thought, well, that's weird. That was extremely detailed. Um, and then the next time I saw him at the barn, sure enough, he had a neck brace on. And I said, what happened? And he said, well, I got in a car accident and something happened to my neck, and he was in a neck brace. And so then that became a pattern in my life. And, initially, I would say even into my 30s, even though I saw Katrina before it hit, and I was able to save myself before I left my husband because I knew this thing was coming. I mean, it sounded crazy at the time, but when it hit, I just, so it was a process of learning to trust this phenomenon that I couldn't explain. And especially because I was so scientific minded, it just didn't fit into my worldview at all. Like, psychic phenomenon doesn't happen, right? It's not, at the time anyway. There's been a lot more research for this, since then. But, at the time, there was certainly no place in my worldview for this, for prophetic ESP ability. It just was not part of my worldview. And it took me a long time to learn to trust it. But it never lies to me. It's always accurate. And sometimes it's disturbing. Sometimes I get information I don't want. And it made me a real empath, or maybe I was already an empath and I just didn't know the words for that as a child, and we weren't diagnosing things like that, in the 80s and 90s. So it's been a mixed blessing. But I think this is a very ancient phenomenon. I think that I think that there are certain genetics that probably carry this kind of ability. I think that's actually what the Holy Grail is referring to. The blue bloods, that kind of thing. I think they've known about it for a long time. Even the Nazis, they had the Vril, because they knew that there was an ability there. And it's my understanding that this is a genetic ability. Men and women carry the genetics, but it's mostly expressed in the women, which is why you hear about a woman's intuition, which is why we had the witch burnings. You know, ancient people knew that there were bloodlines that had abilities. And, you know, um, if you were experiencing psychic phenomenon and you could, you know, sort of see right through a dirty king or a dirty pope, you know, that was a threat. And I think that's a lot of what was responsible for the witch burnings. I think historically, experiencers were labeled as witches. I think they've been burned. I even think my own family history, I'm a descendant of the first man to translate the Bible into English, which was a huge deal at the time, because at the time the Catholic Church would charge people. Bibles were huge, and they were chained to the church, and people would have to go and they would have to pay the priests to translate maybe a paragraph or two. And so translating the entire Bible into English, and then that was the time that the printing press came out. So not only did he translate it, but he printed these Bibles into small pocket versions. And one of his famous quotes, you know, is that I want every boy who plows the field to be able to read the Word of God. And his name was William Tindal, and he was burned at the stake for that. And, you know, when I look at that, I think what could have driven a man, you know, to give his life for this purpose? And knowing what I know about my family history and experiencers from modern day people, I honestly think he may also have been an experiencer and had some sort of divine inspiration to give his life for this purpose that changed the course of history forever.
So when this UFO approached you when you were a kid, did you have any type of connection to it? Did you feel like you had any type of missing time?
Well, you know, that's why I'm not sure. That's why I mentioned the how long I felt like it took for someone to come to the door at my neighbor's house, because it just felt like I was standing there for hours. Um so could something have happened, you know, during that time where I was taken and then put back, and it, you know, the time felt extra long? You know, I don't remember that. I don't know. But I just know that every time I would go to my best friend's door next door, you know, we after school, she'd be right there to open the door. Hey, let's go play. And so that's why I mentioned that. And I do feel like there has been some sort of connection with this vehicle, you know, since then, because I've been shown a lot of places and events, um, but from an aerial view, which is interesting. In fact, one very specific place, I had a dream about it, and I was able to figure out where it was. And then I actually was able to go visit that place. It was exactly how I saw it, but it was from an aerial view. Um, and it was from a different time period. So it's very interesting. So I do think that these crafts are operating off of some sort of genetic link. And I think that they have the ability to sort of sync with you. And I think that Gary Nolan did a lot of research into this, and he called it the antenna effect. And anybody can look it up. It's from a few years ago. And he and Kit Green were actually looking at the brains of experiencers and a very specific part of their brain. And that's called the caudate putamen. And what they found in the brains of experiencers is that they have a lot more connections in that area of their brain. And they literally termed it the antenna effect. And so I do think that there is a genetic component where these vehicles are able to cue in on a certain there's something about either brain anatomy and physiology or genetics or both that they pick up on and they interact with. And I've just from my experience in DC and being Maryland MUFON director and all of my connections, I mean, I had the best connections to the top people. And and I've been told, they're really looking at the genetic links now. And there is the majority of experiencers or contactees certainly seem to have German or English heritage, which is interesting.
So I don't know if you saw some of my videos on my channel, but have you ever decided to do a regression hypnosis to discover some of your to unlock some of your experiences or the memories during that time period? Were you ever interested in doing that? Or have you
No,
heard about
that's
that?
Oh, of course I've heard about it. That's a big tactic in MUFON. A lot of people do regression hypnosis in MUFON. There are a lot of hypnosis people in MUFON. That's not something that I think probably is good for me. Just because of my background in neuropsychology, some things I'm just too familiar with that I don't think they're going to be as helpful with me. Um, but I actually have done, actually one of my great friends was he was running a hypnosis business and, um, he died at a MUFON conference, actually. His name was Craig Lang. Um,
Wow.
yeah, and he was a very healthy man, hiked all the time. Anyways, but he actually did perform hypnosis on me at one point. But I don't think I'm a good candidate for it. I think it's great for some people, but I just don't think it's a good candidate. I'm a good candidate for it just because of my educational background.
Yeah, that's understandable. Um, when these experiences happened to you, did you feel like you were like targeted, or like did you have some sort of backlash for having some of the experiences in your personal life? Like how did your experience kind of affect your life after you kind of started to explore it or understand it? Did you have any type of backlash or been targeted in any way?
Yeah, so I think it's very much like that Steven Spielberg movie. Or it wasn't a movie, it was a mini series, Taken. And it's probably a decade old, maybe older, but I think it's a lot like that because I think that when Tim Burchett, he said, yeah, we have this technology and we are back engineering it. And so I think that there is an awareness of who these people are, who carry these genetics or have these experiences. And then that creates a whole new dimension of that's actually the scary part. The prophetic dreams and the encounters with other and that part is unnerving, but that hasn't been scary. And so when I think that you're an experiencer, sometimes you become you pop up on the radar, so to speak. And I think that when Burchett said that we have some of this stuff and we're back engineering it, I think that he's telling the truth. And I think that I think the experiencers are of great interest to DoD, the military industrial complex, and their contractors. So that's actually the part that I find that has been scary to me in my life the aliens, or I don't even know that aliens is a good term. I like to call it an ancient advanced presence. They don't scare me. They actually show me information that has saved my life. What scares me has been the targeting by contractors and DoD and the like, to, I think, study me, honestly. And because I do think they are back engineering this, and then they want to test it on experiencers. And that's where I think the scary part comes in. I don't fear the aliens, or the ancient advanced presence. I mean, obviously, if they wanted to destroy us, they could. And apparently, they already tried to do that once. I don't fear them. I fear people with capabilities who are trying to figure this out and weaponize it. And I know I certainly don't want to be weaponized for abilities, and I don't want to be studied or a lab rat either. But I do think that that is going on, and there has been a lot of there. I've experienced a lot of very scary things as a result of this. And I never asked for any of this. I never consented to any of this. But I do think that miniseries taken is probably the best way to kind of understand, because I've spent 20 years, I probably talk to an experiencer every day. And certainly when I was with MUFON and a state director, I was talking to experiencers every day who they're scared, they're confused, they're disoriented, they don't know what's happened to them. And the first question is always, why me? They're disoriented. It's frightening. And so I've been offering free services, for decades to these people, just as a public service, because I know what that feels like. And then to feel like you're trapped between, an ancient advanced presence and, the military industrial complex, and then add on top of that targeting by the religious industrial complex. It's scary. And who do you go to for help with that? Who do you go to say, I've got a deep state problem, I've got an alien problem, and I'm stuck between these two. It's and I'm not the only person in that position. A lot of people are, and that's very scary. And I do think that that part is deserving of investigation.
Do you feel that there is a conflict going on between intelligent life beyond Earth and here with our government sector here on Earth? Do you think that there's some sort of like conflict going on, or do you think it's more like the higher consciousness or the higher intelligent beings know what's going on, but our government is just extremely overwhelmed by this, or they just don't want to touch it at all? Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, what have you experienced?
Well, I would just be speculating. I can make a really good educated guess, but my guess is that they know. I mean, they have telepathic capabilities, and my guess is that they know governments have been corrupt forever and ever and ever. I mean, one good example is what they did to Sodom and Gomorrah. In our own Bible, it says the public outcry from about this establishment is overwhelming, and God's had enough, and God sent angels. And at this point, I just whenever I hear angels, I think aliens, because they really have the same definition, right? Like an angel is not of this earth and is an intermediary between here people and another realm. And an alien has that same definition, not of this earth, an intermediary between people and another realm. And so when I hear angel, I just think extraterrestrial, because by definition they're the same thing. So, in Sodom and Gomorrah, God sent two angels as spies to come and investigate. And, they barely even got in the front gate of Sodom and Gomorrah before the townspeople were, the different translations of the Bible will say that they were trying to have sex with them. They were trying to assault them. They were trying to sexually assault these angels. But they didn't know they were angels. They just thought they were outsiders. So they took refuge in Lot's home, and then they led Lot and his family to safety, literally before God nuked them. And so corrupt governments are not a new thing. Corrupt societies are not a new thing. Um, I think our government has painted themselves into a corner because one, they've taken God out of everything. And, that's a whole nother book in itself. And whether you agree or disagree, it basically just shuts the door on, oh, yeah, by the way, there really is this ancient advanced presence. And they've been here for a really long time. And we're sorry we didn't tell you. And, it's been interpreted as God. So they've painted themselves into a corner. I think they've also done some things under the guise of aliens, because you can't subpoena an alien, right? You can't prosecute an alien. There's no address to serve an alien. So I honestly really think that they're probably have I think they've done some things under the guise of aliens, but that does not mean that there are not advanced and that there is not an advanced ancient presence here. I think that what is happening is that we're very dangerous. And I think that they understand this, especially after the atomic bomb. And I think they've probably seen lots of civilizations destroy themselves as soon as they figure out how to split the atom. The Native Americans talk about multiple worlds that have come to an end, and the ant people who come and save them and take them somewhere until it's safe to come out again. And that's a common theme, amongst a lot of various religions. So I think what is happening is I think they're trying to bypass our government. I don't think that they want our government to have technology to be able to destroy ourselves or others. Because if they wanted to destroy us or others, they would have just already done it. So I honestly do think, I mean, look at what Jesus did. Jesus didn't go, Jesus was basically trolling the Pharisees, and he picked up common regular people, a tax collector. Nobody ever likes tax collectors. Sorry, tax collectors, but I'm sure they know they're unpopular. I think Matthew, one of them was a murderer. There was Saul, and it's so much older than the Bible too. And even the Old Testament. So I think that they go directly to the people. And I think that because they know that the people are not corrupted and the people want change. And I think that what we're seeing is a desensitization. And so, in psychological terms, we would call that priming. And I think we've been seeing that for decades, priming for various reasons. There are multiple interests involved in doing that. But I honestly believe that there's going to have to be an intervention at some point, because we have multiple existential crises happening right now all at one time. And I'm sure you're aware. I mean, we're on the brink of nuclear war, world war on multiple fronts, which would be devastating for this entire planet and all of the life on it. We, people can argue about the cause of climate change. I understand that's a highly hot topic, and I'm not trying to be controversial, but something is changing about our climate. Whether it is pole shift, whether it's human caused, our weather has most certainly become more severe, and droughts. famine, human migration. These are all huge issues. And just based upon my experiencer issues, they showed me all of these things um, 10 and 15 years ago. And at the time, it was very confusing because it seemed like everything in the world was fairly stable. Um, and I was very confused and scared by the imagery I got. But now I understand, and I'm deeply concerned for us. I'm deeply concerned not just for, my country in the United States. I'm deeply concerned for the world because we're hitting the gas in the train as we're going off the precipice. And something has to make people stop and think, what are we doing? And see the bigger picture and realize that you're my sister, and I'm your brother, and we're all in this together. And I truly do believe, and I can hear the conspiracy theorists already. Oh, she wants a one world religion. No, that's not what I think. But I do think that every religion has an aspect, has a facet of the same gem of truth. And I think it's kind of like that movie Arrival, where if we could put everybody together with their religious knowledge, we could put a picture together, and that would be incredible. But there are forces who don't want that because division is profitable and it's powerful. And division is absolutely the last thing that we need right now. So I think that the narrative, the ET narrative, the ancient advanced um, presence narrative is not beneficial to our government right now. Um, and they don't do anything that's not beneficial to them. They don't just release information for the good of the public. They do everything for votes. And so until this becomes profitable for them in some way, we're not going to see truth from them, which is why I resigned as a lobbyist and redirected my energies to things that are, pre-DOD time.
With all the experiencers that you have talked to and Congress and stuff, do you believe that our world, our society is ready for disclosure, or is there a lot of work that has to be done for order for disclosure to essentially happen? Like, I know that disclosure is not going to happen by our government. Do you think that getting everyone on board around the world will usher in disclosure, or there still has to be a lot more work to be done? Or is there a lot of pushback, or are people just too afraid for disclosure? Like, what are your thoughts or opinions about that, or your experience dealing with that?
So I think, if I was looking at this from a psychological perspective, and if I was tasked with, rolling out the biggest discovery since Copernicus, really, that would have the same sorts of implications for society, how would I do this? And I just worked the problem backwards like that. And so I would probably spend generations of priming people. I think that the War of the Worlds radio podcast in the 50s was kind of a trial run, and it didn't go well because people, sorry, I have dog fur.
It's okay. It's okay. I
She
understand.
finally chilled out. She's just got to be on me all the time. Um, so I think that the War of the Worlds in the 1950s was kind of a trial run for this to see how people would respond. And there were suicides. So the powers that be said, well, this probably isn't a good time. We need to give them a few more decades. And then there's Chariots of the Gods, Von Doniken. It's been there. Hollywood has been pushing this, my whole life. I grew up with ET. and the movie, you know, and then my own child has grown up with ancient aliens literally since infancy. And so like now I do see probably the late Gen Xers and older having problems with this. And I've personally witnessed that, especially the extremely dogmatic religious ones. But like when I ask younger people who've been literally been raised with ancient aliens, like if I ask my own child and I say, you know, did you know that there's a good possibility that there's an ancient advanced race here and they've been interacting with us? They might have even created us. Yeah, mom, I know that. Why are you asking me that? Oh, okay. And you know, so and I actually even took a poll on Twitter and I had a pretty good sample size. And I asked people, I said, do you think that the UFO or you know, that the presence is has the ability to unite people who otherwise would not be united, and 80% answered yes. And that's actually what Tim Burchett said, you know, that this he said in a TMZ interview, you know, imagine if all of the people of the world were united behind one cause. You know, that's not what they want. The powers want division because division keeps us fighting amongst ourselves and not looking at leadership who has failed us and lied to us repeatedly. And so I do think the public is ready. I think not only they're ready, they're begging for this. I think there are some very dark aspects that certainly need to be handled by investigations and law enforcement, and I'm letting them do that. But that is not the entire, that's not the whole story. And I think that's part of what holds it back. But you know, the bigger story here is that we're not alone. We've never been alone. We do have an ancient advanced civilization who created us and loves us. And it's up to us to prove to them that that we're worthy of being saved. Because almost every, you know, civilization has a flood myth. And you know, and I can imagine it from their perspective. You know, if we were AI creators and we see our creations doing horrific things, just uh, morally horrific and reprehensible things, um, we might say, yeah, pull the plug. We created a monster. So I think it's up to us to prove that we're not evil, that we do have the capability to have empathy and love for one another, and that we are worthy of having our place in the universe and advancing up. Because right now we're about to become spacefaring. If we're not already, we're taking civilians into space. And so we've advanced, and but it's up to us to prove. And I sort of feel like that's kind of what the 10 commandments were. You know, we had the Ark of the Covenant, and I sort of feel like they said, you know, I sort of feel like they said, okay, you know, here's incredible technology. And I actually believe the Ark was uh, a radiation powered craft. It it was how people interfaced with God, and if you got too close to it, you became injured. Um, so I think that they tried. I think they've tried to send us messengers on how to not be assholes to each other. And when we keep killing the messenger, they say, nope, not ready. You know, I even saw a cartoon where Jesus was on the cross and two aliens were standing underneath, and they said, yeah, they're not ready yet. Let's get out of here, Billy, or whatever. And you know, and I do think that it's not just Christianity. You know, certainly in India, they talk about in Sanskrit, you know, they talk about the avatars, and Vishnu reincarnates to teach us. So I do think that they have tried to send us teachers. to teach us how to be decent, just basic decent rules to live by, to be civilized, and not steal your neighbor's shit, and not kill people, and if we want to have this advanced technology, there's just some basic rules, and I'm not sure that we're following those. And I think they've tried to warn us. So I think that it's a very, very critical time in history right now. And I do think the people are ready for disclosure, but I don't think disclosure is going to happen. I'm sorry. I don't think disclosure is going to happen the way that people think. There's not going to be, a presidential announcement to the people, just for the good of the people. That's just not what they do, unless there's some political benefit. Um, so I would stop. I would say to stop looking for the government for uh, permission to believe what you already know in your heart.
What do you think is the most important piece of information or something important that you want to say to people that people should really know about or should start looking into? Like, what is some of the important information that you have uncovered or discovered during the experiences that you have had, the talking to other people, Congress? Like, what is the type of important information that you want to share to people or like people should know?
Um, Number one, I think that it is important to be a good person, and not just outwardly, but you have to be. This is a spiritual practice, and it has historically always been a spiritual practice. And I think you have to maintain love in your heart to have the connection. Um, and not just, doing good things in front of other people. I mean, actually living in the vibe of love, even when it doesn't benefit you. And believe me, I've done that a lot of times where it really didn't benefit me, but I did not want to compromise my spirit, because I feel like staying in a good conscience, having a good conscience, having a clear conscience, and staying in the vibe of love as much as I can, I feel like that's what keeps my connection. And that might be different for other people, but that is what works for me. So I work very hard to do that. So I think that we and the other thing is, when I've looked at so many of the ancient religions over the past 5 years after I quit lobbying, I really realized that what is the one common denominator amongst all of these religions, right? Yeah, there are variations and stories and ideas and rules, and yeah, I get that. That's interpreted through the culture and the people at the time. But what I think it all boils down to is the golden rule, right? Like, do unto others as you would have them do to you. And if people could just follow just that, it doesn't have to be all of these complex rules about, don't do this on whatever day. And, I don't believe that that's the most important thing. I honestly think that the most important thing right now is just everybody needs to be following the golden rule. Because if we truly do have the capability to level up our society, to completely have free energy. I wrote to the UN I attended the UN Office of Outer Space Affairs in 2018. And, we have the ability to have clean energy. But if we want this type of clean and much more utopian society, it starts with every individual. It starts with you, it starts with me, it starts with your listeners and your fans. It starts within. And Jesus said that. He said the kingdom is within. And it starts with just learning common decency. You know, you can go, we've forgotten that we can disagree with people without being ugly or rude or going into lower vibrational states. We can encounter somebody who is completely opposite from our beliefs and still have respect for that person, because I see the divinity within you and I respect that. And I think that that is so important for us to remember about ourselves, because I do think there was a time when we did know this and we did operate by these laws. And I do think that there have been ancient civilizations that really were quite high tech. And in fact, I had the great pleasure of actually interviewing one of the Vatican astronomers, and I won't mention his name because I don't want him to get hate mail. But you know, I asked him. Of course, he's a planetary scientist, so this is his field, and I wanted a different perspective from what I was getting out of Harvard. And, you know, he said the idea of extraterrestrials is just not, like, they're just not backing that, which, you know, I get science. I mean, I was working on my PhD. I get how the scientific process goes, and it's very political, and, you know, it's, anyways, so, yeah, but the caveat was what was interesting. He said, you know, but the idea of an ancient advanced civilization possibly surviving an ancient cataclysm, he said that was interesting, because he said that, you know, through these ancient cataclysms, it really wouldn't take much to wipe out evidence of a very advanced civilization. But if a few of their, you know, top people were able to escape and save themselves, you know, they could still be around. And you know, and this was from a planetary scientist. So, you know, I found that idea very interesting also. And there's a lot of some people would call it folklore, but there are certainly a lot of stories about breakaway civilizations, and I think that also is worthy of investigation. So what I would recommend is people start a meditation practice or a prayer practice. Um, you know, meditation, your thoughts and your feelings are energy, right? And um, first becoming aware of your own energy, it is how you become aware of other energy, and learning you can't change other people, but you can control yourself. And so what I would recommend, especially as I think that we're going into more trying times, is that people learn to recognize their energy, to pray or meditate, which I do believe it's directed, focused intention, either way, whatever your terminology is. And so I would recommend that to people, and ask for these answers from your heart, you know, for yourself. I don't want anybody to just take my word for it. I would invite everybody to take up a practice, whatever works for you, and look within your own heart. Uh, like I said, Jesus said, the kingdom is within, the answers are within. So start your own spiritual practice, whatever is good for you. Stay in the vibe of love as much as you can. Of course, we're all people, and even I get angry. I mean, everybody, you know, but try to practice that. And the golden rule. And I think those are really good starts to sort of being in the place where you can accept other ideas, and maybe even other communications in a constructive and calm way. Because if you think of it from an anthropological point of view, you know, we don't just there's an island off of that's owned by the Indian government, um, And these people are still living like thousands of years old. And I'm sorry, I can't remember the name right now, but anybody can look it up. Most recently, a Christian missionary went there and they killed him. Um, but if you look at it from an anthropological point of view, they're not just going to come land right in the middle. We as anthropologists are not just going to come land right in the middle of this island, in an airplane and, completely give all of these people a heart attack and give them ontological shock that would destroy them. And I do believe that since we're dealing with such an advanced ancient civilization, obviously they understand this, so it's a little bit at a time. But I think it's very critical right now that we have some sort of, we need a change, because certainly the United States is dying. I mean, you can look anywhere in any big city. People are living in tents. They're strung out on drugs. They want to say it's a mental health crisis. It's a spiritual crisis. People have a need. There is a part of your brain. There's even a book, The God Gene. People need a spiritual life. People need something to hold on to. And I think that if we can bring some brothers and sisters back, um, if we can just bring one person back to seeing something in spiritual practice that appeals to them and saves their life, then I think that that's mission accomplished.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with you. I do agree that we need to start learning to unite humanity and find I guess, a common cause. I know that there's probably still a lot of work that needs to be done for that to happen. Um, but I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your information, your story. I really appreciate that you coming on the show and um, educating people about this. I really do appreciate it. And um, thank you so much for coming on. I really do appreciate it. Is there any last type of messages or pieces of information that you want to share before we wrap up the show?
I would just probably encourage people to, don't look at what's going on in the news and pop culture. Like, I would really encourage people to dig into ancient scriptures. Pick one, it doesn't matter, and just shift your perspective slightly. I know that when I tried to read, the Bible or other books, I was completely lost. What are they talking about? Wheels within wheels and eyes all around, and people getting lifted up by the angels. Like, I just thought, what, from my scientific brain, that, what were they smoking, right? But I would encourage people, because you can entertain two ideas at the same time and make a decision for yourself. But I would encourage people to just shift your perspective slightly, and maybe look at ancient religious texts through sort of what we would call the ancient astronaut theory now, and then decide, does this make more sense for you now? Do these pieces fall into place? Do you feel like you have a better understanding? If not, okay, you tried and you can rule that out. But I would encourage people to at least try, because I know certainly for me, once I shifted my perspective just a slight bit, all of the pieces began falling into place for me. And that was really the last place I thought that I would wind up with my research. So I had my own ontological shock. And I would also like to tell people that, I'm available to talk. Can be very shocking information, especially once it sort of clicks. And in fact, I took a 2 to 3 year mental health break myself just to decide what is real and what is not. Oh my gosh, I'm trained as a scientist and I don't believe in scripture and what is happening. Um, so it's a grief process. There's a grieving process for your old worldview as you put together a new worldview, and it's difficult and it's scary And so I'm always available. Anybody can find me on Twitter, the Tyndall Review. My Instagram got shut down. Or they can find me on Facebook also under the Tyndall Review. And also my website got hacked. So I think you can still reach me there, but it looks terrible. And I just haven't had the time to put that back together. But I just encourage people to look for themselves. And I think that we can have a better understanding of all of our brothers and sisters around the world. You know, why do we have to be divided? This really is the one thing that can unite us, and that's exactly what we need right now.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Thank you so much for coming on my show. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and information. I really hope that your story can inspire other people in professional backgrounds to come forward and share their personal experience, their knowledge to the public, and also experiencers. And I really do appreciate for you for coming on. Um, thank you so
Well,
much. Thank you so much.
yeah, thank you for having me. I very much appreciate it. And I appreciate the work you're doing. I really do. I honestly really believe this is a new age of enlightenment. And that's what we need right now because I don't want to see us plunged further into any dark ages.
Yeah. Thank you everybody for watching my show, and hopefully that you'll have a nice, wonderful day. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great day. And thank you, everybody, for watching.